Welcome to the Data Tech Neighborhood. One of the things that we've really kind of worked on highlighting in our different IT Thursday events has been the prevalence of ransomware in the IT world, how it affects your business, and the things that you can do to kind of protect that. And this month, specifically, we're focused on ransomware and how we can protect your business from it. What are the solutions that are out there? We talk a lot about things like firewalls and backups and Windows upgrades and things of that nature, but really understanding where ransomware comes from and why it's something that's all over the news nowadays and why it's so prevalent everywhere is important to understanding how you can make a good business decision for your IT infrastructure and also for protecting the integrity of your business. As we go through and we talk about ransomware, we wanted to start off and talk to you about how ransomware actually works. Next week, we're going to talk to you about the financial implications of ransomware for your business. But understanding how ransomware works and why it's all over the place and why it's such a hot topic right now is really important to understanding how it impacts your business financially too. So this series today is actually going to go through that. We kind of broke it down in some really easy to understand infographics. We may use some high-level technical terms as we talk about it, but if there's things that you have questions about, by all means, please leave comments leave a comment in our actual Facebook Live video. And what we're going to do is at the end of all of this, we're going to take all those comments, we're going to aggregate them, and we're going to do a wrap-up at the end of the month and talk to you about the questions you may have or the things that you may be concerned about. So we'll go ahead and kick this right off. I may use some terms that say we interchangeably. Please understand that's not Data Tech that's doing this. It's just that this is kind of written from a perspective of, hey, we're teaching you how to go and infect a network. So the first thing on this is how does ransomware work? As we go through this, there's a lot of details that we're going to need to get right. As we go through, there's a lot of details that we have to get right if we want to be able to hold data hostage in general. The basic steps of it are, first, the malware needs to be delivered to the victim. How do we deliver that? You hear all the time now about things like phishing emails and emails with bad attachments, or you go to websites and a website tries to download something to your computer that you never actually clicked on. If we were going back 5 years ago, it was that, I think everybody remembers these, remember the old pop-ups. They would pop up all over the place. Your computer's infected. Your computer needs to download this. Your computer needs this. Call now for support. That was at that point, the prevalent way to do it. People have been trained not to open those now, thankfully. But now the new way is to impersonate somebody. They can impersonate somebody, send you an attachment that you think is good, and then you're actually going to execute that. And some of the email providers have gotten a little bit better about that. I know Office 365 as an example is actually doing this new, I don't want to say new, but they've actually eliminated basically all executable files from being able to be transmitted. If you try and send like an exe file or a DLL file or a batch file, any of those files, Office 365 will strip it right out and reject the email. But that's just one mechanism. It doesn't mean that these things don't exist. So a lot of times now you're seeing people send emails that have links where they'll tell you to download it. It may be impersonating like a Microsoft OneDrive, click here to download the file, and things of that nature. So a Trojan, what is it? It's something that looks like it's good from the outside, but you don't know what's inside of it. It's the old Trojan horse. So once that Trojan gets executed, the most important part on that end is that it's going to execute itself and copy itself as many times as it possibly can onto your computer. If your antivirus product or your endpoint security is able to look at one file and find it and say it's bad, that's great. But what if it copies itself 500 times across multiple directories on your computer? And that's what it's going to do. It's going to put itself all over your computer anywhere that it can. that is a folder that's going to be able to be accessed on that reboot, and then it's going to start a reboot. The most important part of the reboot is that once it reboots, it actually starts identifying which files are being used. So the computer's rebooted itself, and now it's already got the malware on it, came in via Trojan, and what it's going to start doing at that point, once it's on your computer, is it's going to start looking for specific types of files. It's going to look for things that are important. If we look at this graphic, it's going to look for files that are PDF files or document files. It's not going to look at things like executable files. And the reason it's not going to look at those is that it still wants your programs to run. When you have a ransomware attack, it's great if it's great if you can get into your computer, but it's even better when once you get in the computer, you go to open a file and the file won't open, because that tells you something's not right. And so now what they're trying to do is they're trying to make it so, hey, you know what, you can start your computer up, your computer's going to run fine in terms of being able to use programs. But the data, the most important part of your computer is the data, right? The document file that you've been working on for that contract that you just won, or the PDF file that has your bank statements and it's got your credit report in it, and it's got all your business certificates and everything. The JPEGs is an example of your child's birthday. It's looking for anything that it can find that is going to be of value to you in terms of the value of that data. So it's going to search across your entire disk. It's going to search across your network, and it's going to find all this data everywhere it can, and it can do all of this encryption from your computer. It doesn't have to actually go to another network computer to do it. If it can find an open directory anywhere on your network, anywhere, the file shares that your company uses are a great example. If it can get to that, it can do that encryption over the wire. It can do it over the network without actually having to even touch the file server itself. So anywhere it has access to open data, it's vulnerable. So it's going to encrypt every file, and then it's going to overwrite the original file. And why is it doing that? That's the other part, right? So we always hear about things like, if you've lost your data on your hard drive, or your hard drive's crashed, you can send it to data recovery experts and things of that nature. The thing about encryption is if they can take a file and they can encrypt it and overwrite the original file, they're overwriting the same space on the disk. And so there's no way to recover the original space that was overwritten. And so they want to overwrite it, because overwriting it makes it irrecoverable. It's not, nobody can go back and get it. So the initial encryption that they're going to do is going to be a symmetric encryption, and what that means is that the same key that they use to encrypt the data will also decrypt the data. And the reason that they do that is that they want to make sure it's as fast as possible. When you do an initial encryption pass, they have to encrypt the data as fast as they can, which does make it inaccessible as soon as it's encrypted. But the reason that they're doing the symmetric one up front is that as soon as it becomes inaccessible, what is the human nature? The human nature is to go and try and figure out, why can't I open this, right? When we open a file, or we go to open a file and it doesn't work, our initial impression isn't that we are getting hit by a ransomware attack. Our initial impression is that there must be something wrong for some reason. There must be, maybe it's the file I'm using, maybe it's the program, maybe it's my computer, let me call for help. I mean, all these things go through our mind, but we don't think, oh, it must be a file encryption for a ransomware attack happening in the background. And so if they can get that initial symmetric one done as fast as they possibly can, then they're going to go ahead and they're going to be able to start executing the asymmetric one, which is going to be the one where we actually throw away the key, I guess you could say. So they do the symmetric encryption. That happens offline. It happens on your computer. It doesn't have to access the internet for that portion. But then once it does a symmetric encryption, the malware is going to reach out across the internet, and it's going to go ahead and reach out to a control server. That control server could be anywhere in the world. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the same country you're in. It doesn't have to be in the same time zone. It's going to be anywhere in the world on the internet. There's a control server somewhere. The control server is really the kind of the contact point. So you'll see a lot of times you hear about these ransomware attacks coming out of different countries, countries that aren't necessarily U.S. allies, or maybe they're just not countries that have strong extradition laws, or they have strong IT security laws. And so you'll hear about these attacks coming from other countries. When somebody says an attack came from another country, that's typically how it's initially tracked. They're looking at where did the traffic come from. So they say, okay, well, the traffic from the computer was sent from the computer here to a computer over in Nigeria, as an example. And that's where at that point, the initial identification of, oh, this is where the ransomware must have come from, that initial assumption is made. So once the malware finds the control server in whatever country it's in or location, it's going to go ahead at that point and generate a 2048-bit RSA key pair. That key pair is coming from the control server. The control server sends it over to your computer, and then that key that is sent to it is actually used to encrypt the files. The files that get encrypted with that key, it's a public key that goes to it. That public key works for the encryption, but only the private key that gets generated after the encryption can decrypt the files. So even if you find the public key, it doesn't mean you can decrypt the files. We still need the private key, and the private key is what's going to get sent from your computer back to the control server. So once the malware receives the public key and it uses it to encrypt that symmetric key, which is the key file, the initial symmetric data that was there. So we took the data, we encrypted it symmetrically, which was the fastest way we possibly could, right? Then it got a key from the control server out on the internet, and that key got sent over to your computer, and your computer used that special key that it received to encrypt the already encrypted data. And now we've got everything all set, and the only way to get your data back is to get the private key, which was sent to the control server. So now your data is held 100% hostage with no way to decrypt it. So now what's going to end up happening is you're going to get some kind of email or message on your computer, or maybe you'll get a file printed out on your printer. I mean, there's all kinds of ways they could get you this message, but at this point, somebody's going to reach out to you and they're going to tell you that they want to sell you back your data. They're going to tell you that they can unlock your data. They're holding your data hostage, and they're going to tell you how they want you to send them payment, which is typically going to be a thing like a Bitcoin or some other kind of cryptocurrency. The reason that they use cryptocurrency is it's easier to be anonymous in that fashion, and it's also it's a harder to track kind of mechanism, and there's no real regulatory authority for it too, which is why it's that way. So they give you a Bitcoin address. We've had clients that have come to us and they've never had to buy Bitcoins in the past, and they're going to like CD locations to try and buy Bitcoins as fast as they possibly can from little physical locations where they can do that. And there's other times where people are scrambling around trying to figure out, how do I buy a Bitcoin? One thing I will say is, if you are not a data tech client right now, but you do have an issue with data encryption for some reason, let's say you got hit with ransomware and now you're being held hostage, reach out to Data Tech, because we can actually help you with that process, and we actually can go ahead and negotiate some of those as well. And typically, once you have an IT company involved, you will see a little bit of a reduction in the ransom. Doesn't mean it's always going to happen, but it's worth a shot. But what will end up happening is they'll reach out to you, you'll negotiate with them. The ransomware holders really, at the end of the day, don't have any allegiance to you or to your organization. They don't really care. They just want their money. That's the way that whole process will play out. So one of the things that I will mention as we kind of wrap this up is that there's plenty of things out there that'll fake this. There is, I'm not saying that ransomware doesn't exist. Ransomware does exist. It's very prevalent. In the first quarter of this year, there was more ransomware identified in that quarter than the entire fiscal year of last year. So you have to realize that it's quadrupling in the amount of ransomware that's out there. It's definitely something to worry about. But one thing to mention too is that there's a lot of people out there that fake it too sometimes. So we've had a lot of phishing emails and things of that nature that have been sent where they're silent attempts. So it's important to check those things before you just say, hey, you know what, I got nailed. but it's also important to have an IT provider that can help you through that process. So if you haven't dealt with ransomware and you do think you have something potentially security-wise on your network that you need to be concerned about, and you don't have an IT provider that can walk you through that process, reach out to Data Tech and we can actually walk you through that process, make sure it's something that's legitimate that we need to be concerned about, and then deploy tools to make sure that we remediate that problem and we are able to isolate it. That's the most important part. So with all of that being said, I appreciate you guys all joining us today for our IT Thursday. I hope this was educational, and I hope that it kind of broke down some of the very basic steps of how ransomware is created. As we continue this series, next week we're going to go ahead and talk about the financial implications of a ransomware attack on businesses and what that means to you. And we look forward to continuing our series throughout the month. Once again, like, comment, and share this post so you can be added to our drawing for our Amazon Echo. And have a good day.